Orchid gazed out the window of the moving truck as it rumbled down the winding forest road. Tall pines stretched up on either side, their branches reaching toward the cloudless blue sky. In the distance, she could hear the muted rush of the river weaving its way through the woods. "We're almost there, sweetie," her mom said from the driver's seat, offering a reassuring smile. "I know moving is hard, but I think you're really going to like it here. It's so peaceful and beautiful." Orchid nodded, trying to muster some enthusiasm. It wasn't that she minded leaving the city. She had always felt more at home surrounded by nature rather than skyscrapers and concrete. But starting over in a new town, a new school, was daunting. She worried about making friends, fitting in. The truck turned onto a long gravel driveway that cut through the trees. Moments later, a large log cabin came into view, rustic yet inviting, with a wide porch wrapping around the front and large windows to let in plenty of natural light. Orchid felt herself start to relax. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. As soon as the truck rolled to a stop, their dog Quint bounded out, eager to explore his new surroundings. Orchid laughed as she hopped out to join him, breathing in the fresh, pine-scented air. Her mother began unloading boxes while Orchid wandered around the side of the house. There, stretching out behind the cabin, was the river she had heard. It tumbled over boulders and swirled in deep pools of turquoise. A sense of peace washed over her. She couldn't wait to spend her summer days exploring the woods and splashing in the cool water. As the first several weeks passed, Orchid fell into a pleasant routine. In the mornings, she would join her mom and Quint for jogs along the riverbank trails. Afternoons were spent reading on the porch or sketching the wildlife that frequented their yard: rabbits nibbling clover, butterflies flitting between wildflowers, even the occasional deer at dusk. It was a tranquil, if slightly lonely existence. Orchid hadn't met any other kids her age yet, but she tried not to let it dampen her spirits, knowing once school started she would have plenty of opportunities to make friends. For now, she was content in her wooded haven. That all changed the day she first saw them, the twins, racing along the opposite bank, their laughter carrying across the rushing water. The boy was tall and lanky, with warm brown skin and an unruly mop of dark curls. The girl, clearly his sister, had the same rich complexion but with eyes a startling shade of green. They moved with an athleticism and grace Orchid envied. She lifted a hand in a tentative wave and was surprised when they waved back enthusiastically. The boy cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted something, but his words were swallowed by the roar of the river. He pointed upstream to where the water narrowed and the flow gentled, then took off at a sprint, his sister on his heels. Intrigued, Orchid followed along her side of the bank. When she reached the crossing point, the twins were already balancing their way across the rocks that created a sort of natural bridge. They leapt nimbly from stone to stone until they reached her side, barely even winded. "Hey, I'm Caron," the boy said brightly, extending a hand. His grip was warm and strong when Orchid shook it. "And I'm Jade," the girl added, her emerald eyes sparkling with mischief and fun. "Are you new around here? We've never seen you before." "Yeah, I just moved in about a month ago," Orchid replied, suddenly feeling shy in the presence of these vibrant, outgoing kids.
"I'm Orchid."
"Like the flower? That's so pretty," Jade declared. "So you'll be starting at Maple Grove in the fall?" "Yep, I'll be in 5th grade," Orchid confirmed. "Us too," Caron grinned. "That's awesome. Hey, you should come hang out with us. We were about to go to our secret spot to catch minnows."
"Wanna come?"
A delighted smile spread across Orchid's face. "Definitely," and just like that, a fast friendship was born. For the rest of the summer, the trio was inseparable. They spent their days exploring every inch of the woods, climbing trees, searching for salamanders under rotting logs, building a clubhouse out of fallen branches. Time seemed to stop having any meaning as they lost themselves in imaginative games and carefree laughter. Some days they'd help Orchid's mom weed her new vegetable garden, getting into good-natured soil fights. Other times the twins would bring over fishing poles and they'd while away the hours on the riverbank, bare feet dangling in the current, seeing who could catch the most bluegill. Caron was the daredevil of the group, always eager to invent new challenges to test their limits, like who could shimmy furthest out on a high tree branch or hold their breath the longest underwater. Jade was the clever one, quick with a joke or scheme to get them out of chores. And Orchid found herself opening up, blossoming in the warmth of their easy camaraderie. Most evenings they'd end up at Orchid's for dinner, feasting on the bounty from the garden and roasting marshmallows over a crackling fire pit. Orchid's mom would smile at their antics and jokingly call them the Three Musketeers. Indeed, Orchid had never felt such a sense of belonging. The twins felt like the siblings she'd always longed for. Only two small things struck her as odd, niggles she brushed aside in the golden haze of those halcyon summer days. One was that Jade and Caron always arrived and left through the woods. Orchid had never seen their house or met their family. When she'd ask, they'd give vague answers about living just over the ridge. She decided maybe their home life was difficult somehow and resolved not to pry. The other peculiar thing was Quint's behavior. The usually friendly lab mix adored the twins, frolicking and playing fetch with them for hours. But in the evenings, when the woods began to fill with shadows and Jade and Caron took their leave, Quint would start whining and refuse to go back in the house. He'd pace at the tree line, a mournful look in his eyes, before flopping down and resting his muzzle on his paws with a heavy sigh. Orchid figured maybe he was sad to see his playmates go and just wanted to prolong the fun. As August drew to a close and the first day of school approached, Orchid found herself actually excited. She couldn't wait to show Jade and Caron around, introduce them to the friends she would make. Having the twins by her side, she felt she could take on anything. But when the morning of the first bell rang out crisp and clear, Orchid was surprised to see no sign of Caron and Jade on the walk to school. She waited by the crossing stone, thinking maybe they were just running late. When they didn't show after 10 minutes, she reluctantly continued on, figuring she would catch them in class. Only they never appeared. Orchid scoured the halls between periods, peeking into classrooms, scanning the cafeteria. But those familiar faces, as dear to her now as her own reflection, were nowhere to be found. An unsettled feeling took root in her stomach. After school, she raced along the river trail to the special boulder that had become their meeting place. But only the chipmunks and sparrows greeted her. Fighting rising panic, Orchid bushwhacked through the undergrowth to where she thought the twins' house must lay, calling their names until her voice went hoarse. Only birdsong and the sighing wind answered. The next day was more of the same, and the next. Orchid threw herself into her studies, tried to befriend her classmates. But a hollow ache had opened inside her, a gnawing sense of loss. The magic of the summer seemed to have vanished with Jade and Caron, leaving behind only fading memories and questions that haunted her. After a week, no longer able to stand the not knowing, Orchid resolved to get answers. She approached her teacher after class, a solemn and kind man named Mr. Charles, and asked if he knew of any students named Jade and Caron. An unreadable expression flickered across his face, there and gone in a blink. Carefully, he told her there were no current students by those names. But when she described them, recognition dawned in his eyes. Gently, he revealed they were the names of his own younger siblings, twins, who had died 10 years earlier in a car accident with their parents. Orchid stared at him in numb disbelief as he showed her their photos, school portraits of gap-toothed grins and glinting eyes achingly familiar to her. She mumbled a thank you and stumbled from the room in a daze, the corridor seeming to tilt and swirl around her. That night, curled up with Quint on the porch swing, Orchid stared out into the darkness of the yard and tried to make sense of it all. Had it truly been ghosts she had befriended, the spirits of children long gone? Everything had felt so real, so filled with life and love and laughter. How could it have been otherwise? She didn't voice her experiences to her mother or new friends, instinctively knowing they would not understand. It became her special secret, a treasure she would carry with her always. From time to time, in the years that followed, Orchid would catch a glimpse of movement from the corner of her eye while walking along the river. She'd whip around, breath-catching, hoping to see Caron balancing on a high branch or Jade skipping stones across a deep pool. But it was only ever the wind tossing the leaves or a hawk swooping in the blue. Still, she never stopped feeling their presence. In quiet moments, she could almost hear the echo of their bright voices on the breeze, almost feel the phantom grip of their hands in her own. Though the world told her otherwise, in her heart, she knew the friendship they had shared was real. Death was not the end of love. On the 10th anniversary of Jade and Caron's passing, Orchid made her way down to the crossing stone at dusk. She carried a mason jar filled with blossoms from her mother's garden, deep purple irises, sunny buttercups, delicate apple blossoms. Kneeling at the water's edge, she tenderly set the blooms afloat and watched as the current carried them away. "Thank you," she whispered to the sighing trees, to the first stars of evening. "Thank you for the gift of knowing you both." And for just a moment, as the twilight gathered close and the twilight birds began their evensong, she could have sworn she heard a girl's laughter sparkle across the swirling eddies and a boy's whistle a jaunty tune in harmony. Then a breeze skimmed along her cheek as soft as a parting kiss before dancing away through the leaves. Orchid closed her eyes and smiled through tears both joyful and bittersweet. No matter where life took her, she knew she would never walk alone. A piece of her heart would always reside here by the rushing river, young and immortal and endlessly loved. Here, where magic lived and time was a circle with no beginning and no end. Where a ghostly summer, golden-edged and shimmering, would never fade away.